The sun was setting behind the clay rooftops of a small but bustling African town, its golden light spilling into the courtyard where the evening cooking fires were being lit. The smell of roasted maize and spiced stew lingered in the air. In one of the larger homes, a young woman named Amina stood over a steaming pot, carefully stirring. Her hands trembled slightly, not from inexperience, but from the weight of expectation. Her husband, Khalid, sat in the courtyard with his friends, men dressed in clean shirts and polished shoes, sipping tea and laughing heartily. Before we continue, make sure subscribe to African Tales Haven for more powerful stories of hope, mystery, and wisdom. And comment, where from you, watching? So they were men who loved to talk about business deals, politics, and the stock market, things that always made Amina feel small whenever she walked past them with a tray of food. That night, Amina had prepared her grandmother's recipe, a dish filled with bold flavors of ginger, garlic, and fresh coriander. She carried the tray out with a hopeful smile. But as the men lifted their spoons, Khalid suddenly smirked. He said loudly, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Amina has tried again. She thinks she is a chef, but my brothers, this food tastes like medicine from the village clinic. The men erupted in laughter. One slapped his knee, another nearly choked on his tea. Amina froze. Her heart stung, her throat tightened. The laughter echoed in her ears louder than the crickets in the night. One of Khalid's friends added cruelly, "Brother, you should hire a real cook, or maybe send her to cooking lessons before she poisons us all." Her eyes watered, but she forced a smile as she collected the empty tray, walking back to the kitchen quietly. Behind her, the laughter continued, like drums of humiliation. In her small kitchen, with the clay pots and wooden spoons, Amina whispered to herself, one day, they will eat my food and bow their heads." The night after Khalid's cruel laughter, Amina lay awake on her mat, staring at the ceiling. The faint glow of the lantern cast shadows on the mud walls. She replayed the humiliation again and again, the way the men mocked, the way her husband's voice cut deeper than any knife. But instead of letting the pain crush her, she felt a fire burn quietly inside her chest. The next morning, after Khalid had left for work, Amina wrapped her headscarf tightly and walked to the bustling town market. The air was alive with sounds, vendors shouting prices, goats bleating, children running between stalls. The smell of spices filled the air. Cumin, turmeric, cloves, and peppers piled high in colorful sacks. Amina stopped at one stall where an old woman named Mama Zuri sold herbs and spices. She had eyes that seemed to hold 100 secrets. "My daughter," Mama Zuri said softly, her voice warm, "you look troubled. What is it you seek?" Amina hesitated, then whispered, "Teach me. I want to cook. Not just ordinary food, but food that people will never forget." Mama Zuri chuckled. "Ah, so you want to make flavors sing on the tongue." She leaned closer. "Cooking is not about filling stomachs. It is about touching souls. If you have patience, I will guide you." From that day, Amina began a secret journey. Whenever Khalid was away, she sneaked to the market, learning about rare herbs, strange roots, and spices she had never used before. She wrote notes on scraps of paper, filling a small book that she kept hidden beneath her bed. Late at night, she would light a small charcoal stove and experiment in silence. She ground spices with a stone, roasted peppers until they smoked, mixed pastes that painted her fingers with color. Sometimes she failed, burning the stew or making it too bitter. But other times, she created flavors that even made her gasp in surprise. And in those quiet nights, as the village slept, Amina found her secret joy. She began to dream, not of escaping her husband's cruelty, but of one day standing proudly in a kitchen where her food would be celebrated. Yet still she kept silent. By day, she remained the humble wife who served in the shadows. But by night, she was an apprentice to greatness. And though Khalid mocked her still, she no longer cried. Because deep inside, she carried a secret flame that no one could laugh out. Weeks turned into months, and Amina's secret skill began to blossom. She mastered dishes that fused tradition with creativity: spiced lamb with honey glaze, rice steamed with tamarind leaves, fish wrapped in banana leaves, and roasted with fiery chilies. Still, no one knew of her late-night experiments. To the outside world, she was only Khalid's quiet wife, mocked for her bad cooking. One afternoon, as she returned from the market with a small basket of herbs, she heard the sound of drums echoing through the village square. Children ran excitedly, shouting, "The Festival of Harvest is coming!" The Festival of Harvest was no small affair. Traders traveled from faraway towns, and important guests came to taste food, watch performances, and celebrate abundance. It was also a tradition that villagers would showcase their best dishes in a cooking contest. Standing near the square, Amina overheard two women talking. "They say the governor himself will attend this year," one said, "and he will taste the winning dish."
The winner, the other added, will have their recipe featured in the city's grand restaurant for all to see. Amina's heart raced. For a moment, she imagined it, her food, her flavors, being tasted by people who would not laugh but admire. But almost immediately, doubt crept in. What if they laugh again? What if Khalid finds out and forbids me? That evening, as Khalid sat boasting with his friends, Amina quietly prepared a simple meal. She listened as one of the men mentioned the festival. "Are you going to enter, Khalid?" Another teased. "Surely your wife will embarrass you again with her cooking." The men burst into laughter. Khalid smirked. "No need. My wife knows her place. She cannot cook even for me, how will she cook for the governor?" The words stung, but Amina kept her head low. That night, she sat outside under the moonlight, staring at the fields. Mama Zuri's words echoed in her mind, cooking is not about filling stomachs. It is about touching souls. Slowly, she whispered to herself, "I will enter. Even if I fail, I must try." The next morning, with trembling hands, she signed her name for the competition. For the first time in her life, Amina had chosen not to remain silent. And with that single act of courage, her journey toward destiny truly began. The days leading up to the harvest festival were filled with excitement across the village. Women ground spices in heavy stone mortars, children ran about collecting firewood, and the air carried the mixed scents of roasting maize, fried fish, and sweet plantains. But in Amina's small kitchen, behind closed doors, another kind of preparation was unfolding. At dawn, before Khalid awoke, she practiced new recipes she had never dared to cook before. She roasted peppers until their skins blistered, ground them with garlic and ginger, then stirred them into stews that shimmered with deep, smoky flavors. She experimented with honey from the hives near the river, adding it to her sauces for a balance of sweetness. Every mistake became a lesson. Every burned pot, a step closer to perfection. One evening, as she tasted her dish of spiced chicken with ground nut sauce, tears filled her eyes, not because it was bad, but because it was good. Better than anything she had ever made before. She whispered, this could be the one. But keeping her secret wasn't easy. Khalid grew suspicious. "Where do you disappear every morning before I wake?" he demanded one evening. Amina forced a smile. "I go to the market early. Food is cheaper then." Khalid narrowed his eyes but didn't press further. He was too proud, too sure of her failure, to imagine she could be preparing for something greater. Meanwhile, in the village square, whispers began to spread. "Have you heard?" Villager one said. "Amina has entered the cooking contest." Villager two laughed. "Her? She can't even boil rice properly. She will be the joke of the festival." The laughter spread, but Amina ignored it. At night, she remembered Mama Zuri's words and prayed quietly for strength. The night before the contest, she prepared her ingredients carefully, wrapping them in cloth and setting them aside. Her heart pounded so hard she could barely sleep. Tomorrow, she would face the world, not as the wife who was mocked, but as the woman who dared to dream. The morning sun rose golden over the village, casting long shadows across the square. Drums echoed in the distance, children danced in colorful clothes, and the smell of roasted meats and fresh bread filled the air. It was the day of the harvest festival, when the best cooks from across the region would compete before the elders, the chiefs, and even visitors from faraway towns. Amina walked slowly into the square, her bundle of ingredients clutched tightly in her hands. Her heart raced, but her eyes held a quiet determination. All around her, other contestants set up their stalls. Shiny pots clanged, fires roared, and spices filled the air in waves of fragrance. Khalid stood nearby, arms folded across his chest, smirking as he whispered to a neighbor. "She will embarrass herself in front of everyone. I told her cooking isn't for her." The neighbor chuckled, shaking his head. But Amina did not look at them. She set down her bundle, lit her small fire, and whispered to herself, "Today, I cook not to prove them wrong, but to prove myself right." As the contest began, a gong sounded, and the square erupted into sizzling pans, pounding mortars, and clouds of steam. Contestant after contestant stirred rich stews, grilled fish, and laid out trays of fruits. The audience clapped and cheered as familiar dishes filled the air with comforting aromas. But when Amina's turn came, the crowd grew quiet. Many expected her to fumble, to drop ingredients, to burn her food. Instead, she moved with grace. She roasted peppers over the fire, their skins crackling and releasing a smoky perfume. She pounded them with ginger and garlic, her hands steady and sure. The sound of the mortar echoed like a drumbeat, drawing curious eyes. Soon, the scent of her stew spread across the square, rich, deep, and unlike anything the villagers had smelled before. Heads began to turn. Children tugged at their mothers' clothes, asking, "What is that smell?" Even the elders leaned forward, whispering to each other. Khalid's smirk slowly faded. For the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. Amina lifted her pot carefully, her dish complete, and placed it before the judges. The entire square went silent, waiting to see what would happen next. The judges, 3 respected elders of the village, sat at a long wooden table. Before them lay rows of steaming dishes, each one colorful, fragrant, and carefully prepared. The crowd leaned in as the first judge, Elder Musa, dipped his spoon into Amina's pot. The moment the stew touched his lips, his eyes widened. He paused, tasting carefully, then took another spoonful. A murmur spread through the crowd. Elder Zara followed, her wrinkled hands trembling slightly as she lifted the spoon. She closed her eyes as the flavors unfolded on her tongue. "This," she whispered, "this is extraordinary." The third judge, a stern man rarely impressed, took his time. He chewed thoughtfully, swallowed, then set the spoon down. He stared at Amina for a long moment before nodding. By now, the crowd was restless. Everyone wanted to know what magic was in that pot. The elders gestured for a few villagers to step forward and taste. One by one, they dipped bread into the stew. Faces lit up with surprise, then delight. Some closed their eyes, savoring every bite. Soon the square filled with gasps and applause. Children licked their fingers, women smiled knowingly, and even the men who had mocked her earlier were nodding in silent respect. Khalid, standing in the back, clenched his fists. His jaw tightened as he saw the villagers swarming around his wife's stall, praising her food. For the first time, he felt a sting of shame. Then Elder Musa raised his hand for silence. The drums stopped, and the murmurs faded. He stood and declared, "This dish is not just food. It is a gift. Amina has brought to us a new taste, born of tradition yet filled with her own spirit. She has shown us what it means to cook with love, courage, and imagination." The crowd erupted into cheers. People chanted her name, "Amina! Amina! Amina!" Tears filled her eyes, but she stood tall, her heart swelling with pride. For the first time in her life, the whole village saw her not as Khalid's quiet wife, but as a chef, a creator, a woman of worth. Word of Amina's cooking spread like fire through dry grass. By evening, people from neighboring villages had already heard whispers of the woman with magic in her pot. Some even arrived that very night, asking if there were leftovers they could taste. The next morning, the marketplace was fuller than anyone had ever seen. Stalls stood half-empty as curious visitors crowded around Amina's small table. She cooked tirelessly, serving steaming bowls of stew, fried dumplings, and spiced flatbreads. Each bite brought smiles, laughter, and amazement. Merchants from the city who had traveled through the village stopped by as well. One wealthy trader, after finishing his meal, said with wide eyes, "Madam, your food belongs in the city, not just here. People will pay gold for flavors like these." The words carried weight. For the first time, villagers who once mocked her began to speak with pride. They boasted, "Yes, she is from our village, our Amina." Soon, dignitaries, travelers, and even noble families sent for her dishes. When a local governor heard of the woman whose food drew people from miles away, he summoned her to cook at a banquet in his palace. The day she entered the grand hall, dressed simply yet with quiet dignity, the crowd of nobles looked on with curiosity. Servants placed her dishes on golden trays, and the moment the first spoonful was tasted, the entire hall erupted in applause. The governor himself stood, smiling broadly. "This is no ordinary cook," he declared. "This is an artist, a chef of the people." From that night onward, Amina's name traveled beyond villages and towns. Songs were sung about her flavors. Stories were told of the humble woman who turned mockery into mastery. And back in her village, people began to notice a shift. Khalid, who once mocked her cooking, now walked quietly, humbled, as strangers greeted him with the words, "You are the husband of the great Amina." Khalid sat alone one evening, staring at the fire as the village buzzed with Amina's name. He had once laughed at her, mocked her meals, and told her she was wasting her time. Now the world called her a genius, a chef unlike any other. As Amina returned from the market, her arms filled with baskets of gifts, spices, fine cloth, even coins, he muttered bitterly, "Everyone praises you now. But they forget who provided this roof over your head." Amina set the baskets down gently. She looked at him, her eyes steady but calm. "Khalid, I never wanted praise. I only wanted to share what I love, to bring joy through my cooking. You mocked me, but still, I cooked for you. I will never repay cruelty with cruelty." Her words struck him like a hammer. For the first time, Khalid saw the truth. It was her strength, her patience, and her unshaken heart that had lifted them both from obscurity. The next day, he walked through the village, and instead of hearing his own name, he heard only hers. "Have you tried Amina's stew? She is a gift from heaven." The governor himself honored her. Khalid lowered his head, ashamed. The same tongue that once mocked her now found no words. That evening, he returned home and found her grinding spices with her usual gentle focus. For the first time, his voice trembled. "Amina, forgive me. I was blind. I didn't see who you truly were. Now the world sees it, and I feel like the fool who mocked gold because it was hidden in the soil." Amina looked at him quietly, then smiled softly. "Khalid, gold is not found without fire and pressure. Perhaps your words were part of the fire I needed. But now, let us move forward with kindness, not mockery." In that moment, Khalid wept. The proud man who had ridiculed his wife's cooking now realized the greatest meal she had ever served him was forgiveness. News of Amina's cooking no longer stopped at the village borders. Travelers carried tales of her unique flavors, her ability to turn simple grains, lentils, and herbs into dishes that tasted like feasts from another world. One day, a merchant from the city arrived. He tasted her food, wide-eyed with wonder. This is unlike anything I've ever eaten. Amina, the world must taste this." He invited her to the city to cook at a great food festival, where chefs from many lands competed to showcase their skill. Khalid hesitated, fearful of the crowds and skeptical of her worth, but Amina accepted with quiet determination. When the day came, the festival grounds overflowed with people. noblemen, governors, merchants, and common folk gathered, eager to taste the world's best meals. Some chefs displayed rare meats, exotic spices, and golden platters. Amina stepped forward with nothing but her clay pots and the simple ingredients she carried from home: lentils, onions, a few herbs, and the same grinding stone she had always used. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Is this the village woman who dares to compete? She brings no wealth, no extravagance, only poverty on a plate. But when the first spoonful of her stew touched the judge's lips, the mocking silence turned into awe. One judge stood in disbelief. This is not just food. This is memory, comfort, and joy in a single bite. The crowd demanded to taste it, and soon, the air was filled with murmurs of delight. Her stall overflowed with people, far more than the richest chefs had. By the end of the day, Amina was crowned the champion of the festival. Reporters wrote of the village woman whose food carried the soul of a people. Soon, restaurants invited her, magazines photographed her, and her name began to spread beyond the city, across borders, across nations. Khalid stood at the edge of the cheering crowd, stunned. The wife he once mocked now stood on a stage, celebrated as a celebrity chef, her name written into history. Fame came quickly, but Amina never let it blind her. Even as she cooked for governors and kings, she kept her heart rooted in the soil of her village. Reporters would ask her, "What is your secret ingredient?" She would smile softly and say, "Love. Love for my people, love for the land, and love for the food that carried me through poverty." Her first decision as a celebrated chef was not to open a restaurant in the city, as many expected, but to build a community kitchen in her village. There, no one went hungry. Farmers who once mocked her now brought her their best crops. Children who remembered her struggling days now watched her teach cooking with pride. She also began writing a cookbook, not filled with complex recipes for the elite, but with simple dishes anyone could make. She titled it The Taste of Home. Within weeks, it spread across the country, inspiring people to embrace the food of their roots. Khalid, once ashamed of her, now stood beside her, humbled. He often told others, "I was blind to her gift. She fed me every day, but I never truly tasted her greatness until the world showed me what I had." Years later, Amina's name became more than just celebrity chef. She became a symbol of resilience, a reminder that talent, when nurtured with love and persistence, can rise from the smallest kitchens to touch the whole world. And when people spoke of her, they didn't just speak of her recipes. They spoke of her journey, a woman mocked by her own husband, who transformed ridicule into respect, and became a legend who fed not only the stomachs but the hearts of millions. Never let anyone's mockery silence your gift, because the very thing they laugh at today could make you unforgettable tomorrow. If this story inspired you, subscribe to African Tales Haven for more powerful journeys of resilience and triumph.